Hey guys, welcome back to another album review. Today I will be reviewing the somewhat long-awaited new Red album called Declaration. This is Red's first album they've released independently. For a long time they were on a contract with Essential Records, and then with their 2017 album Gone, that contract ended, and so they went independent, stating that they don't want to make full-length albums anymore and that they just want to do some EPs and several singles and stuff like that. So when the Evening Hate came out, I didn't expect an album. So for a little bit of short history with me and the band Red. Red has routinely been my favorite band. I discovered them about 5 years ago now with Until We Have Faces, and I fell in love with that album and I got into their other albums as well. Of Beauty and Rage became my favorite album of all time, and it's been like that for a couple years, and it is still like that to this day. I just have mostly loved their discography. I've seen them live twice, and I think that they really tread beyond what's expected of a Christian rock band. They really push the envelope a lot, especially on Of Beauty and Rage, and even Release the Panic, although I wasn't as much of a fan of that one. That was like a 7 out of 10. That was good, but it is my least favorite album of theirs. Probably because Rob Graves didn't produce it, Howard Benson did instead. I don't think they've even released a bad album. Even the one that he produced I still thought was good. I was shocked when they announced this album. I thought that they were going to be done with Gone. I mean, it's called Gone. But yeah, Declaration is here nonetheless. It has 10 songs on it. It's interesting because Gone also had 10 songs on it, and I was disappointed about that because Of Beauty and Rage had more than that. Not all of them were full-length songs. 12 out of 15 were, but still, we're getting shorter albums from them lately, and it's a shame because I like hearing longer albums of theirs, but I was still very excited for Declaration. I did hear 4 of the songs before. I listened to it several times so far so I could review it here and explain my thoughts on it. I know that a lot of people are curious to see what I think about it. It's interesting because The Evening Hate and From the Ashes and Sever, they were all a bit different for Red. Sever was classic Red for sure, but Evening Hate and From the Ashes, the bass drum didn't sound quite right. There was clipping in The Evening Hate and just odd things like that, and I guess it makes sense. They're going independent. They don't have the backing of a label behind them now. Now they're crowdfunding everything. I was a little worried for the album just because the singles weren't completely up to par with the singles they usually release before albums. So yeah, we shall see how this holds up compared to the rest of their discography and on its own merits, of course. Going into instrumentation, this is by far their heaviest album. There's no question about it. I mean, being a Red fan for so many years, interacting with Red fans online that were my friends, you know, there was a lot of debate that's been going on about which album is the heaviest, you know? The common consensus was that Of Beauty and Rage, their heaviest album. Although Gone even had some heavier moments than we had ever seen from them before. It was just more electronic heavy. But this is not that. This is not Gone Part 2. If I have to compare this to any of their albums, it's gonna be Release the Panic, strangely enough. There is more of a straightforward, heavy sound favored over big theatricality. Now, I'm not saying this isn't theatrical. It's Red. Of course there's gonna be theatrical moments. From the Ashes is a very theatrical closing track, but for the most part there are several songs on this album that don't really get into that at all. Overall, Declaration is very metal inspired, and I noticed some odd parallels between some of the songs and some other band styles, like The Victim sounding just like a Korn song, especially like mid-2000s Korn, like if any of you remember Coming Undone and Twisted Transistor. Then we have Only Fight. This sounds like metal Nirvana. This is the first thing I thought of when I listened to it. The reason why I say it reminds me of Nirvana is because there's a lot of call and response vocals that remind me of a lot of songs on In Utero and Nevermind. Some of the breakdowns here as well throughout the album I would say are metalcore inspired. Songwriting wise, there are a lot of catchy melodies on the album. It's easy to get these songs stuck in your head. I will say that this is probably not one of their catchiest albums. That probably goes to Until We Have Faces, but if you do listen to the songs maybe 2 or 3 times, you're gonna have them playing in your head over and over like I am right now. I'm hearing Cauterize right now. The song The War We Made is kind of an interesting cut here because it's the only ballad on the whole album. There are a couple softer moments on From the Ashes, and even Sever's a little less intense than most of these songs, but The War We Made is the only real ballad here, and it still has some prominent screaming just to show how metal they wanted to go on this album. I think that they've been wanting to make a metal album like this for quite a long time, and they just couldn't under Essential Records, and so they wanted to as soon as they went independent, which makes sense. Some of the intensity on this record is really good. I found myself really impressed by some of the really deep sounds they were able to get. It's visceral in a way I've never really heard from them before. That's pretty much all I wanted to say about the overall sound of the album. Now I'm going to get into the vocals. This is going to be one of the departments I'm a little more negative on, which is really sad because I love Michael Barnes' voice. He has a fantastic voice. One of the best voices I've ever heard, but something went wrong here on a lot of these songs. I would say Cauterize and All For You are the biggest examples of some off moments vocally. The screams here are very prominent and very passionate. There are a couple screams I think are forced on a few of the songs. Now there are other moments on the album, like Only Fight, where I think his screams sound great. It feels like he barely has to try for them, and then they sound so full. But my least favorite part about the vocals here are the odd vocal inflections we get. We have those high B flats in All For You's chorus where it just sounds like he's killing himself to get there. There's a good amount of that can sound really good and heartfelt, but it went a little over the line for me. I feel like Michael's higher register in general is starting to kind of shrink a bit. I mean, this could be due to age. I don't know exactly how old he is. I'm going to assume he's about 40, so like him at 40 is not going to sound the exact same as him at 25, I understand that. He still has some great vocal moments, of course. I like Only Fight. The Evening Hate sounds great. There's a lot of good higher notes that he hits in that song, and they sound fantastic. So I'm not like crapping all over his voice. I would say that the vocals are still very good, of course. It's just I'm starting to notice a difference. Going beyond that, we're going to go into lyrics. Overall, I would say the lyrics are nothing outstanding. They fall into pretty much the same territory as their other albums. There are a lot of lyrics about self-reflection, toxic relationships, fighting against one's own thoughts, and then kind of like in the end rising above it all. The narrative in the last 3 songs is all tied together. I feel like when I was reading the lyrics, I was thinking, you know what, I can see a lot of similarities. I could see a story where all these songs are grouped together. So these last 3 songs are Sever, Only Fight, and From the Ashes. Sever is about cutting ties with a toxic person who is manipulating you. Then we get Only Fight, when it seems like it's kind of a relapse. You come back to this person, you succumb to them again. Then we have From the Ashes. It's a little more vague, so I don't know if it's all tied together, but it does seem like a general victory lap at the end, which is good at the end of the album. It's a nice way to close it out, it sounds inspiring. It's not too generic. I mean, I'm making it sound generic. It's not as generic as I'm making it sound. I would say that Evening Hate and All For You are a little bit weaker lyrically, and I would even go as far as to say here I can see them start to emulate Breaking Benjamin, reusing the same lines over and over. The last thing I wanted to say about the lyrics is there's this interesting line in All For You where they just get really scandalous for no reason. I would just never expect Red to say that. I don't care if they want to curse or they want to say whatever they want to say. I'm not there to silence them or whatever. But as a Christian band, I just find that really odd. Alright, now I'm gonna briefly go over production, and then I'll go over some of the tracks briefly. Going into the overall production, I did make a few comments about this sounding more like Release the Panic, and the fact that they go for a simple heavy sound, and that definitely is true. I will also go on to say that this is the weakest production Red has had since Release the Panic. The bass drum is the biggest culprit here because we hear a clicky, loud, tinny bass drum throughout the entire album. I can't think of a single song where this is not a problem. I noticed this on the Evening Hate and From the Ashes, and I mean, I listened to the album and I was like, okay, is this the way it's gotta be? Says Breaking Benjamin. The production is a little more general. It's a little more general heavy metal, and there's not as much emphasis on the string section. It's not as intricate. The other part of production is that there are some odd transitions between the verses and choruses, and then there's also a double drop C we have to deal with. From what I know, Cauterize and All For You are in double drop C. As absurd as it does work pretty well here, and I don't think it sounds terrible. I think the songs could have sounded maybe a little more clear if they were in regular drop C, but it would lose a lot of the heaviness, so I understand why they wouldn't want to do that. But that is just kind of an interesting observation. I kind of applaud them for pushing the envelope that much. Again, like I said in the beginning, it's time for the track reviews. So I talked about a few songs a lot, and then there are a few I barely mentioned. First, we have All For You. I'm not going to talk about this one much because I've already kind of talked about it. It's very heavy, it's straightforward, it just kind of gets the job done, it's in and it's out. It has a very great bridge, it has some great screaming in it, but again, absurdly low guitar tuning, and definitely not one of my favorites here. When I heard it, I was like, I didn't know what to think, but as I've listened to it more, it's not one of the best here. Track 2, we have Infidel. I'm shocked I haven't talked about this one because this might be my favorite on the album. This is the Imposter of Declaration. Imposter was the full-length opening song to With Beauty and Rage. It is phenomenal. I love it. It does a perfect job at being slow-paced and very slow-burning and brooding, and I love it. This song is also very deeply intense like that and very memorable. It's a huge highlight on the album. Track 3 is Cauterize. I talked about this one a lot too because this is just a very interesting song. That scream that happens at the end of the verse, that's very slow before it goes into kind of like the more like steady pre-chorus. The way the scream kind of just cuts off, I feel like is an odd production choice that I'm not a huge fan of. But then the pre-chorus also reminds me of Nirvana a little bit. I get some Breed vibes from the melody. Track 4 is The War We Made. This is the ballad of the album, and from what I heard, it's their first time they're trying to push a radio single since Hold Me Now from Release the Panic in 2013. I think it deserves it. I think it's a very well-made song. However, this might be one of my least favorites here. And there's a couple odd reasons why I think this. The first is that the verse structure is a little odd to me. It does have a good bridge, from what I remember. It doesn't suffer from as many production issues as the rest of the album. The Evening Hate is next up. This is kind of a darker, deeper song, first single. It has grown on me a bit. I started coming back to it in preparation for this review. I was like, you know what, this is a great song. Like, I think about how that last chorus happens where the drums kind of like slow down and then you hear Michael Barnes just go, inside that. I love that. I think that's flawless. The clipping is still noticeable in the vocals, of course, but hey, this also has a very good orchestral outro. I really miss when Red would do these. Next song is Float. This is a Frankenstein song. This is something my friends online have said as well. It's got a very odd combination of verse and chorus. The transition into the chorus kind of like stumbles on itself, but as I've listened to it more, I find it really endearing. I kind of like how this really intense verse just kind of launches into the chorus, and then the chorus is not as heavy as you expect. It's kind of a nice way to trick the listener, and so this is becoming one of my favorites, pretty much just because of that. Track 7, we have The Victim. This is basically a Korn song, like I'd said. When the bridge came on, I think this is my second or third time listening through The Victim, I had to rewind it to the start of the bridge like 4 times in a row because I was thinking, wow, this sounds so good. It's so catchy, so hooky. This is one of the best songs here for sure. Track 8, we have Sever. This is classic Red, like I'd said. Sounds like End of Silence or Innocence and Instinct. It has a very gorgeous melody. I love it. And I would say this is probably the song that fits the least on the album. I could see this being released about 10 years ago. It being released now is odd. I almost wonder if they'd written this a long time ago and just scrapped it and then now released it, because it really has that sound. Honestly, this might be more successful at the radio than The War We Made. Track 9, we have Only Fight. One thing that I haven't said about the song yet is that everybody hates it, except for me. I'm the only one I know that thinks it's one of the better songs on the album. I'm the only person I know so far. Let me know if you think that in the comments, or if you don't. But I think this song is great. I think it's a perfect song to be like not quite the closing track, but later in the album to kind of wake you up. It's a shorter song, it's very furious, it's kind of driving and brooding in the verses. There's some nice use of electronics in the verse that's kind of the backing instrumentals, this big pulse that happens, and I think it's perfect because it is kind of like Release the Panic. Release the Panic had a lot of that stuff. It prepares you for the chorus, which is just extremely angry. It's a big explosion. I feel like this is the song that is probably the least like Red, and that's probably why everyone doesn't like it, but I think that it was pretty good territory for them and that it actually fits them really well. I really like this. And then of course we have From the Ashes. I believe this song is also pretty Frankensteined. Probably not to the degree that Float is, but it's close. This has also been a song that's grown on me. When I first listened to it, I was like, okay, maybe a light 7 out of 10. I didn't review it, but I gave it a 7 out of 10, like in my mind. And now I probably would give it more like an 8. It definitely has grown on me. It's a very special song. It's pretty unique in how many different things they try to incorporate in it. Now that it has grown on me, I think this is a very serviceable closer to a very good album. So, in conclusion, this is a very, very, very good album. It is better than I expected, to be fair, because I was worried about how this would turn out because I knew that the production was not going to be as good as normal Red albums back when they were on a label. Even though this is not their best work, there are some of their best moments on this album, whether they're scattered throughout the songs or whether they're a whole song like Infidel. I'll have to give it a pretty light 8 out of 10, as good as some of their other albums. I would say this is probably their worst album next to Release the Panic. Still better than Release the Panic, not better than any of their other albums, at least not right now. I might pin a comment in the future if this changes. If it doesn't, then I won't do that. When I reviewed Gone, I also gave it an 8, but now it's a 9 out of 10, of course, but hopefully this will also do that. Hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.